Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This is the first episode of the second season. Let me thank you so much for tuning in today. And today, what we're going to do is take a look at the highlights of the first season and preview some of the really cool topics of season two. Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This has been created for those of us that love radical women who live perhaps by the rules, but also question and challenge the status quo. We want more from our lives, to enjoy our sexuality, to explore radical thought, and to celebrate women who have lived and continue to live unconventional lives. Hi, I'm Dr. Toni Bear, sexologist, educator, activist, and definitely a radical woman. Thank you for joining me as I share stories of women challenging the status quo and living life to the fullest. Join me as we unapologetically march to the beat of a different drummer together. Imagine being back in school again. Do you remember that kid that hardly talked? The one that kept their eyes down? The one that would never raise their hand and speak in class? They were so self conscious. In fact, you might not even remember that person because they were so quiet. And truly, that is the story of my life. I did not start talking to people. I wasn't outgoing until I became a teacher in my 20s. And the idea that I would host a podcast, let alone speak on a podcast, would never have arisen in my psyche in my earlier life. So here I am in this Radical Rhythm podcast. I created it because I don't think there are enough opportunities for women to tell their stories, more specifically, women who march to the beat of a different drum, those that are radical. Well, radical compared to those that are much more tame, those that live their life unapologetically and became who they wanted to become and do not let any barrier stop them from their dreams. That is who I became. And as I walk through life, I tend to meet a lot of women like that. So the purpose of this podcast has been to share those stories. Now, when I started, I didn't exactly know where we were going with this. And I say we collectively because very few of the podcasts are me solo. Most of them are interviewing someone else. I've been doing this on YouTube for 1 year. My goal was to do 3 episodes a month, and it ended up being 2 episodes a month on average. Life does get in the way, and I wanted to consistently produce podcasts so that our listeners would have new material to listen to. But to keep a pace like that and also work full time and do many other things at the same time, I lead a group of women around the world who march to the beat of another drum. And maybe this season we'll get into that. I talked a little bit about it in one of the podcasts last season called Pleasure Dome. I've been fascinated with the history of the Mongols and the Pleasure Dome created by Kublai Khan. And I compared some of the women's spaces that I've created to creating this utopia, this Pleasure Dome. And it was fun. I never in a million years would think that a broadcast that was full of my stories about me and my journey would be something that would be somebody's favorite. Well, I asked some of my friends to call in, And let's pretend that we're a radio show, I said. And tell me what your favorite broadcast last season was. And lo and behold, Robbie called in and we talked about one of my solo stories. Let's pull Robbie on so you can hear what he said. Well, thank you so much, Robbie, for calling in to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. I'm trying something different. I'm asking my friends to call in and tell me what their favorite episode in 2021 was. And, it seems like such a long time ago, but I'm ready to release episode number 24. So, thinking back, Robbie, which one was your favorite episode?
Thank you for taking my call. And I want to say mine was Hanky Panky.
Hanky Panky. About the
Yeah,
hanky
Hanky
code?
Panky. Yes, about the hanky code.
What do you like
How you?
about the hanky code or that episode?
Oh, it talked about how it was different for lesbians versus gay men. How it's evolved and continues to evolve. How you almost got hurt in a situation, a bad situation, because there was no hanky code at the time.
Right.
And when you walked into a bar one night, you saw what you figured to be your future wife
Right. Right.
flagging a hanky.
Yeah.
And you said, that's what I'm into.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a perfect match and I knew what she was into. Now, the one thing I do have to say is there was a hanky code when I met that woman and and got into that precarious situation. There was one. I just didn't know there was a hanky code and
Well, I just like the fact that I've, watched you guys evolve and grow too as a couple. And that's
yeah.
nice to see. I'm sure you're using different hankies
Yeah, yeah.
than you were.
As you progress through life, you're looking at something sexually and you're thinking, "Wow, I'd never be into that." Right?
Right,
And then kind of like what you like, but then you move on and you might like something else. And
right,
that's one of the things I do is as a coach and a community leader on Facebook on the Voyages of Aphrodite is I try to talk women, into exploring very safely by themselves their fantasies and not being afraid of going after them. And that's what hankies show. You flag your favorite sexual activity or your fantasy.
right.
So,
I
Robbie,
agree 100%.
thank you. So, Robbie's interview really surprised me. I thought that Robbie was going to pick one of the episodes with Vi Johnson. About one third to one half of season one is with Vi Johnson of the Carter Johnson Leather Library and Collection, uh, because Robbie and Vi are so close. I was so surprised that Robbie picked one of my stories. There were only 4 episodes in season one where I went solo. Twice about my research about feminism and about women's sexual fantasies. That's easy for me to do because that's almost in the third person. I'm talking about research that somebody else did or a group of us did. However, 2 of the episodes, one about the snake and my greatest phobia, and the other one on the hanky code, were my personal story. And that was hard to do. And to hear Robbie say that that was one of his favorite stories or episodes was really, really validating. And I appreciate that. So I mentioned Vi Johnson because she just is an expert storyteller. In fact, she trains people to be griots or storytellers with her library. And I was not surprised that one of our call ins chose one of Vi's episodes. And there were so many to choose from. Let's take a look at what Lillian said. Well, welcome, Lillian, to the Radical Rhythm podcast. This is the very first time that I've had call ins, and I really appreciate you calling in. I know you've listened to a number of episodes. Can you tell us which episode was your favorite?
So my favorite episode was, I think it was number 6, and it was the one that you did with Vi Johnson about Lillian Harman.
Wow, was that the first time you heard of Lillian Harman?
No, I had heard of Moses and Lillian from Vi before, but nothing that in depth. And it basically kind of started me on my own rabbit hole with Lillian Harman because, in the interview, Vi mentions that she has the letters that from the Harman family. And so as soon as she said, if anyone would like to research in the podcast, I gave her a phone call. And so now I'm actually assisting her with the letters. And
Wow.
so that all came from the podcast.
Fantastic. I mean, that was her dream. When she showed them to me for the very first time, she said, I need someone to help me. There's just way too much here. And somebody who wants to research really should take a look at these and give them the time that they deserve. And I am thrilled that you've taken on that project. It's huge. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about where you are with that, of what you're allowed to talk about.
Well, I've been to the library a couple of times to work on them. And the first time, it was just going through boxes and separating who wrote what. His George Harmon O'Brien's wife, Marion, was a prolific letter writer with her family. I literally had a box that comes up. She set it flat on the floor. It comes up to my knees, full of letters just between her and her parents.
Wow.
And then we've actually found some things in Lillian Harman's handwriting. And that's always exciting, especially going through them. I learn their handwriting because you see it and you kind of know what to look like. So now being not only able to hold her letters in my hands, but being able to recognize her handwriting is pretty cool. Like the nerdy side of me just loves that.
Well, I think that's really cool. Wow. You know, I just dreamt that maybe the podcast could be something that we would get someone's attention and we would make a difference in the world. Um, as someone who's a university professor most of my time, I never know when students leave my classroom what they're going to do. And I'm always thrilled when I get a letter years later telling me that something they heard or something triggered their curiosity from one of my classes that they went on and did something or another. But Lillian, those letters from students are very rare and and they big chunks of time in between any kind of message like that. So the idea that we did this maybe 6 months ago and you are already on it, it is absolutely thrilling and amazing on my part. So,
Well, it's been nothing but fun for me. I love the project a lot.
well, fantastic. So, can you suggest? I mean, I'm just throwing this out there and I might stump you, I don't know. But can you suggest a topic that you would like to hear about in the next season? Or something you would like Vi to be interviewed about that you've seen at the library in Evansville, Indiana?
Oh, wow. That is a lot.
There's a
Because
lot, but what would be the
when you
next
go to the
topic?
library, there's so much. Um, I think I know you've done something similar where Vi kind of made a list of her radical women, that she could tell stories about.
Mhm.
Um, and I think maybe I'd like something along that vein.
Okay.
Go back and have her tell a story or pick through stories that she's known for that she's told, and then kind of go down the rabbit hole of one of them.
Okay.
And talk about the people involved and how they all looped around. And, one of the stories she tells is about a party she threw for Monique Von Cleef. And there's so many ways in that one story. You touch so many areas of the community at that time, of the stories about her being arrested and how all that came around full circle. it's just amazing how that one story has so many leads, has so many connected dot moments in it. And
Right.
I think that's what I would love to hear, something like that, connecting the dots of the story.
Okay. That sounds great. Well, thank you so much. We did do a podcast on Monica Van Cleef, but I'm going to
Hmm.
ask Vi for another person that has an interesting story with multiple facets, like Monica Van Cleef. So, thank you so much, Lillian, for calling in today. I really appreciate it. Well, as you can imagine, I was quite taken back by finding out that my friend Lillian was actually researching about Lillian Harman, and it was a result of the podcast and having Vi Johnson on. As I said in the interview, Vi wanted more than anything else someone to look at these letters and take them apart and read all the letters that are in these boxes that she acquired through an auction, I believe, an estate sale. And how exciting is that? That the podcast, is initiating some future research. So, I'm thrilled. I am absolutely thrilled. This podcast has reaped more than I could imagine already in season one. Vi has so many great broadcasts from her own personal history. I interviewed her about her life in New York in the 1970s to telling us stories about significant women in United States history who made a difference, um, allowing those that came after them to have more freedom in their sexual expression. So, uh, and there was such a wide range. I asked Vi about her favorite books. I asked her about marching to the beat of a different drum. And I'm so excited she is going to appear in season two again many times because that library, that Carter Johnson Leather Library and Collection in Evansville, Indiana, is a treasure trove of information about sex and culture, and also kinky culture, as well as leather culture, and just sexual freedom in general. So, Vi will be coming back multiple times. Now, I interviewed one more friend. She called in. Her name is Rachel. She is an author herself and has written both fiction and nonfiction. And she has edited some of my works, which I can tell you was more than excited to meet her during this COVID break. But I've also met so many women online, business women, women who are healers and spiritual. Someone who, Melanie McCool, is a hypnotist. Um, Kathy is someone who is an opera singer who produces operas around the world. A Vietnam vet who transitioned from male to female. Let's take a look at my interview with Rachel because there was someone else who I met from Naples, Italy, that she found to be her favorite episode from season one. Rachel, thank you so much for calling in to the show today. And I appreciate you being here and willing to share what your favorite episode in 2021 was. So, would you give it up for us?
Sure. First, thank you for having me. My favorite episode was episode 16, Moving Past Structural Barriers and Being in the Flow of Your Consciousness.
Wow, that sounds so technical. What what did you like about that one?
I enjoyed the message, the positive message that came through the podcast. Um, I connected with Claudia, I believe, Claudia Brawl, in
Yes.
many ways, how she learned about self love
Mhm.
and chakras and energy and trying to be the best person that she could be. And that's one of the reasons I've actually watched the podcast a couple of times because you pick up new things each time.
Mhm.
And like I said, I just felt a connection to her.
Wow, thank you. I didn't even know it was that one by the name. As I think about it, like, that name seems so technical, but Claudia is so, just in the moment, and, she would be someone I would portray as someone who is not technical at all, who
Hmm.
has been working with me this year as a friend at different times to, get out of my head and get out of the technical and just live life in the moment, which I grew up thinking that was irresponsible. What was your takeaway at this time? You said you took away different things at different times. When you think about it, is there like a life lesson there for you?
There's a difference between being mindful and mindful. That was one of the things that I took away from her. The second is that you can connect with yourself through dance. I love that part where she was talking about just turn on music. Don't worry about anybody, the technical moves, and just flow with the energy and just be. That there's a sensuality, also a component of that, but it's a way that you can connect yourself with energy and your mind kind of clears. And as a prior dancer, I connected with that, what she said, because that was an escape. That was where I went to clear my mind all the time. That was whenever I had an issue or a problem or felt stressed, I danced. And I was just like, you know what? I forgot all about that. And she reminded me that that's a good thing, just turn on music and flow and dance with it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one thing that she does do all the time. When I was in workshops that she put on, as like we would do some work and some conversation, and then all of a sudden she would say, "It's time to dance." And myself being a little uptight American, I'm like, "Oh God, no!" Right? And she just get up, not care, just start flowing with her body and her arms, and I'm like, you know what? I can do this, and I did.
Hmm.
It was beautiful. And
Yeah.
I love what you took from it, to be mindful, not mindful.
Hmm. Yes. And being, loving yourself was another thing, because as you know, I've been working on that for a while, and her message was very clear, and you could tell that she is somebody who is very comfortable in her skin. And her energy just I believe it's her energy that draws me back to watching the podcast several times, is because, like I said, there was just this kind of unspoken connection with her. And I'm not real sure why, to be honest.
Hmm. Well, Claudia is in Naples, so you let me know when you're ready to go. I have an open invitation to go visit her, and you should come with me.
I'd love to see you, Lily. Oh my gosh.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for calling in today. I really appreciate your listenership and yourself as my friend. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I really enjoyed hearing Rachel's story and how Claudia made a difference for her. And I'm thrilled with Lillian in looking at letters and doing research, and Robbie giving me some validation on my own personal stories. My favorite episodes fit into a fourth category. My favorite episodes are the new voices, the voices seldom heard. And I interviewed two young women with the difference that they're making. One of which is in a rural area of the United States, and she's a conservative Christian, and she's coming out as gay. And she talked about negotiating conservative Christianity and homosexuality. And I enjoyed interviewing her. And she also has a podcast. And the second one is a young woman in Canada who made a difference not just in her own life, but in the law in Canada as insofar as restorative justice being an option for those that are survivors of sexual violence. Interesting. In fact, I interviewed Marlene for 2 episodes, and I don't normally do that either. I only did that with Vi in the last episode because the stories were so extensive, and I wanted to give their stories justice in 2 different episodes. So that was season 1. We had new voices, we had my own voice, we had interviews with Vi Johnson, and also a variety of women that I've met from around the world that COVID has given me the luxury of being kind of locked down and meeting people online rather than face to face. So now season 2 is about to take off. I have some great people lined up. I have an erotic poet. I have a woman who lived in the 1990s, I believe, on lesbian separatist land. I have an individual that helped shape a law. I'm not going to tell you which one. Um, in England. In England. So there's going to be international stories. I'm going to interview someone who's in Spain. These are women who are making a difference in the world, and they walk to the beat of their own drum. Tune in season 2 to hear some fantastic stories of women making a difference in the world. Thank you for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. It has truly been my pleasure to invite guests and talk to you about my passion, the joy in our sexuality, and radical women who march to the beat of a different drum. If you'd like to work with me, Dr. Toni Bear, I have a community where I give seminars every month. I also have a coaching program, both group and individual, and also a course, a self-directed course, because it's all about experiencing the joy life has to offer. I'd love to work with you. Check out my link below, www.tonibearedd.com. See you next week, and don't let anyone dim your shine.